everybody, and welcome to episode number 32 of On the Flank. I am one of your hosts, John George, alongside Joe Kirkpatrick. Say hello, Joe.
Hey, everybody.
And when it comes to analysis, we are on the flank. Joe, sometimes I do that, sometimes I don't. That little tagline, I feel like I forget it most of the time.
So if you haven't heard it before, that is what the show means.
Yeah.
So.
When it comes to analysis, we are on the flank. All right. We're coming at other analysis from different angles, right, Joe? We are just so different. We're amazing.
Absolutely.
We're so different that we're doing power rankings today. No one's ever done that before.
It's crazy.
Yeah, it's like these rankings that aren't the standings, but it's rather how good we think the teams are. It's a little thing Joe came up with, Joe. I mean, it's pretty impressive.
It's all me for sure, obviously.
Yeah. But before we get into that, let's give out something else Joe made up, a Stage 1 MVP, which stands for Most Valuable Player. I'll go first, and I believe I gave this man a week MVP. I can't remember which week it was. But it's Bumper of the Vancouver Titans. I think he definitely deserves stage MVP in my mind. I'm a huge fan of the main tanks, and I think in GOATS meta, there are a lot of need for a really good main tank. Example, fusions on Boston Uprising. Boston Uprising had no right to be in stage playoffs, but the man absolutely carried them. He's a Giga Chad, everyone knows. And yeah, Bumper was just the best Reinhardt, the best tank by far, and he was much like what Jonak is to NYXL in that everybody on his team plays around him, supports him, allows him to absolutely go crazy on Reinhardt, dive into the back, all this stuff. And I think without Bumper, Vancouver Titans wouldn't have gotten that Stage 1 title. So I got to give it to my man Bumper. Joe, I heard you don't have an actual player, but you're giving it to something else.
Yeah, it was. I thought it was notable. You did clarify MVP does stand for Most Valuable Player. But this stage was really super hard to try to do that. And I sort of was trying to sit down and like go through all of the teams that there are, because there are a lot of teams, and all of their MVPs, and there are some that really stand out, like for Boston, or not even so much Vancouver, but Fusions for Boston, or Dante for Houston, or that sort of thing. But the pattern I noticed that lots and lots of teams, not even necessarily because of, or reflected in their stage 1 results necessarily, but just in general, lots and lots of teams lived and died by their flex tank or their flex DPS, depending on how they were played, player this stage. We came in, we said Overwatch League Season 2 Stage 1 is just going to be GOATS dominated, and for sure it was. But I think, trying to look at the where we were coming in at the beginning of this stage, and we couldn't, or at least we certainly didn't, I don't think, predict the way that Sombra would come in and be an effector of the GOATS meta. And obviously, we saw she's definitely not the answer in patch 1.34 or whatever it is, or because that's the live one for stage 2, whatever, it's like 1.32 or something that they were on. Sombra's definitely not the answer for GOATS in that stage 1 patch, but lots of teams were able to get lots of things done because of her. And so actually, yeah, Sombra is my my most valuable hero of season 2 stage 1. Just think about so many great names on their own teams. Think about Guard from London Spitfire, Michelle from Seoul Dynasty. Dedeng came in for Shanghai Dragons. Gave them their first win of ever. Arguably because of their use of the Sombra. Is and like I said, she didn't end up being a meta definer necessarily, but the gigantic contribution to what otherwise meta wise and hero wise was a relatively predictable stage is definitely notable for me. So I guess that's my what MVH um, of stage one.
Yeah, I definitely gotta agree with you there. I mean, people like Dante were, I feel like, super helpful on Houston Outlaws on that Sombra. And Dante was just overall, in my opinion, Houston Outlaws' best player. Um, and yeah, Sombra brought some new things to the table, and it was fun to watch. It was fun to watch every single person get hacked on a Summer Ultimate. It was enjoyable. In the end, maybe not the best strategy, but it was still very fun. So Joe, you wanna review? Let's review the standings a little bit before we go into stage number two. Like already,
It's
we're two
crazy.
days away. But we have a nice little top six, top eight going on. I mean, if you make the top six in the overall standings, you automatically make playoffs, and then I believe it's 8th through 12th are in the wild card playoffs. So leader of the Pacific Division is the Vancouver Titans, 7-0, and over in the Atlantic, you also have a 7-0 team, the New York Excelsior. These two teams will not meet until stage four. Who knows how good they will be by then? Overwatch is a changing game, everybody. Who knows? Then we have Philadelphia Fusion and the Toronto Defiant tied in third at 5-2. Atlanta Reign, San Francisco Shock at 4-3, alongside Seoul Dynasty, Boston Uprising, and Dallas Fuel. Dallas Fuel is the only team at 4-3 to not make the stage playoffs. So the only team with a winning record to not make the stage playoffs, and it's because their map differentials at a fat old 0, completely even in maps, and I think that's very much due to the many 0-4s that they lost in the beginning of the stage. I think it was a couple, just two. And then you have so many 3 and 4 teams. You have the Gladiators, the Charge, the Outlaws, the Spark, the Dragons, the Spitfire, the Hunters, and the Eternal, and that is in order of map differential, with a couple exceptions. Of course, you have the Spark, Dragons, and Spitfire all tied at -4, and then you have the Hunters and Eternal at -8. Yeah, and then we go Washington Justice and at 1-6, Florida Mayhem also at 1-6, and then of course the Los Angeles Valiant at 0-7, the only team winless. Whew. Standings. The standings are so big this year. There's so many teams.
And it's so dense, at least stage one for sure.
Yeah, I
It's
mean,
hard to.
there are so many teams at 3-4 or 4-3. I mean, it's pretty impressive. We have no 6-1 teams. I expected a 6-1 team, Joe. I thought we'd get at least one, but
You would think.
yeah, no love. And it's impossible to get one at this point, I think. So 6-1. Sorry to that record, but no one's going 6-1. Joe, let's just talk surprises. I think the biggest surprise is Toronto Defiant at 5-2, and their schedule wasn't even like that easy. It was about middle of the pack for stage one. 5-2. Last week I mentioned maybe we'll do contenders or pretenders. I think we might as well do it for Toronto Defiant. Do you think that Toronto's actually a contender? This might be a little spoiler for your power rankings, but do you think they're a contender or a pretender?
Yeah, Toronto is a very unique team, really, for this for this stage in particular. Like we said, neither of us had rated particularly highly going into the season. I think it was like 16 and 17 out of 20 for us. And then yeah, all of a sudden to have this really nice stage, go 5-2, make the playoffs is definitely notable for them, over our expectations. But do they, do they have the potential to keep, to maintain that energy going forward. I mean, sure, the potential's there, but there's definitely a lot more to prove for this Toronto squad. It's that's I don't think that's an unpopular opinion. Uh, that we definitely need to see more out of them. But yeah, so to classify, contender or pretender is difficult for them, I think. But they've got potential. Um, but I'm not quite convinced, I guess. So which one would that be? I don't even know. Uh, they haven't convinced me they're not pretending yet. How about that?
Okay. Yeah. I agree. If we're talking going for third place here, if we're talking contending for top three, I definitely think that the Toronto Defiant are pretending. Um, do I think that they could be a good team and possibly make wild card and maybe even top six? Yeah. I definitely see. I like their coach Bishop. I like their players, their individual talent. But I mean, while their difficulty of schedule was middle of the pack, I think their most impressive win is either Boston or Chengdu. And I know Boston was pretty inconsistent and in stage one, and Chengdu started heating up towards the end, and that's when Toronto beat them. So yeah, both those wins are kind of impressive. 3-1 in both of them. But when they face the big dogs, San Francisco Shock 3-0'd them. They lost to New York Excelsior 3-1. Lost to Atlanta Reign 3-1. They barely beat Los Angeles Valiant. Barely beat Houston Outlaws. So I haven't really seen when we've seen real tests like New York and San Francisco, they haven't looked that great. So we haven't seen too many more of those real tests either. So I think we'll see. They might come around to middle of the pack when we see maybe a bit of a tougher schedule for them. Okay. We'll single Toronto out. That's it, and then we'll move on to news. How's that sound?
It
um,
works. It works.
so I going into this week into this episode, I think including me, a lot of people expected a lot of moves, a lot of roster moves, especially from teams like Florida Mayhem, Paris, all these teams that are doing terribly. It's time to make moves. It's time to stay proactive. Everyone expected it, and maybe we'll still get it. We still have a couple days left, and I mean, knowing us, we'll record the podcast, and then right after it's done, something crazy will happen, and we'll be super upset.
Oh, for sure, for sure.
Yeah, yeah. But the main news we got this week was Atlanta, and some unfortunate news to start it off was Dafran retiring. And this was out of nowhere, honestly, because it seemed like he was very much enjoying himself, having a good old grand old time, and I guess one stage was enough for Dafran. Joe, what do you think about this? I'm still in shock of it.
Yeah, it's there's the whole spectrum of reactions that we've gotten. Everything from oh, he was just in it to in it for the stage. He didn't have any plans to go very much farther beyond that, but just boosting his stream, and so now there's all this, and I'm sure there's some validity to that. That's sure enough, he's definitely gonna have an even larger following than then began. That's not a question here, because now again he's been signed with the Atlanta org now as a streamer along with Fran. But yeah, it's I don't know. I think we saw preseason, early season that you know there were definitely some hesitancies with him. He quit in like December or something. He's like, oh, ripped up my contract. We're not going to play at all in the stage. And then of course, but he did show up. But it's hopefully for his sake. He played a stage, discovered it wasn't for him to, for emotional reasons, for preference reasons, whatever. and is going to go on and do things that he's actually going to enjoy, and that's significant and that's helpful. And if that's the case, then absolutely, good for him. We'll miss him for sure. Um, and all the trash talk and all the Reddit plays and whatever. But it sounds like ultimately, if this is going to be something that's better for him, that's got to be a good thing.
Yeah, I'm gonna miss it, honestly, and I gotta give him credit for that. I gotta give him credit for how well he did in stage one, because even on this podcast we were having discussions like, when is it gonna happen? When is Dafran gonna implode? When is there gonna be some huge controversy and he's gone out of the league? But I can't believe, I think both of us were messaging sort of about this. We can't believe that um that Dafran retired and Dafran is out of there, because I mean he just had such a, it seemed like he was having such an amazing time, and it seemed like everything was going well and going perfect. And we joked saying that at the beginning, like in the off season, we would have been like, oh yeah, this is obvious. He retires after stage one, of course. But we're now at a point where it's a surprise all of a sudden, which is credit to him for getting through this stage if he's having issues and having trouble, with having a great time and not making any controversies, and not having anything like Dafran didn't practice this week because he's sick of Bergia, or he's sick of Zarya, he's sick of goats and all this stuff. It's good to go through an entire stage without controversy, and then just retire because, it's sort of on your own terms, instead of like the Atlanta Reign saying you need help or else you need to retire and all this stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, it's good for Dafran.
You just try to keep himself from being forced out, right?
Yeah,
If nothing else, that's
exactly. But yeah, he's a huge fan favorite, and much like when XQC got kicked out of the league, this will be much like that. I feel like, as far as fans go, because especially for Atlanta Reign, Atlanta Reign sort of had. I think they were the most cheered for team on Twitch. I wonder if those fans stay. I wonder if they were mostly Dafran fans in general and not Atlanta fans. Uh,
yeah, I don't know.
so you got to feel bad for Atlanta on that one. But um, I mean, you had some Dallas fans who were huge XQC fans or huge Siegel fans. Those players aren't there anymore, but I think they're still Dallas fans.
It's true.
So we'll see, though. We will see. After that, Atlanta came out and they signed, Funny Astro to a two-way contract. He's a British player. Um,
There's
he
lots of
was,
Lucio.
yes, he plays lots of Lucio. He also has played Mercy, but hopefully Mercy's not back in the meta anytime soon. He was on the British Hurricane in
Yeah,
Contenders Season 3, which is, of course, the London Spitfires Academy roster. I call them Academy rosters now because I'm in LCS, and that's what they call them there. I know they're called something different in Overwatch League. I can't remember right now, but
I
yeah,
should- I mean, lots of them are academies.
yeah, true. Atlanta
Fusion
Academy,
University,
Fusion
Boston Uprising
University.
Academy.
Wait until someone calls it a high school. Fusion University, Fusion High
Yeah,
School, Fusion Middle School, Fusion Elementary.
there you
And
go.
then they're farming players from every age group. Fusion Preschool, you got to get those Overwatch players on the PC as early as you can, Joe.
Absolutely.
And Fusion will do it. But yeah, what do you think of, Funny Astro? I never watched too much EU contenders, so I don't know too much about him.
I know he's really good at his role. That's for sure. I kind of am a little bit surprised. And like you said, we've still got a couple of days before the season starts, but I'm a little bit surprised we haven't seen a DPS signed here to replace Dafran
Yeah,
in the last week or however long it's been. Um, but for Atlanta, come in really nice. Again, Lucio, might not have as big a place in the stage two meta as in stage one, but Atlanta's got a really hard schedule um, for stage two, if nothing else, just because of playing New York twice. But um, yeah, it's additions for Atlanta are good. They played really well. Could have even made it to that round of four in the stage playoffs, easily enough. That yeah, it's a good sign. It's just a matter of can they compensate for their losses now.
Yeah, I'm also interested in why why there's no DPS signing for Atlanta right now, but I guess they do have two DPS in Erster and Lair. Is that a and Lair?
Yeah.
So they've got two DPS there. You've probably eventually want another one. So yeah, I'm surprised in general we haven't seen that many signings, but we'll see what happens if anything happens today, if anything happens tomorrow, if anything happens right before the stage is gonna start. That would be some theatrical stuff, you know. If they
Yeah.
if
They
they just
announced, Dafran was actually a debate, like at
yeah.
5 p.m. on Thursday before they
People
play.
are actually theorizing about that on Reddit, and I'm not sure what to what to say to those people, but stop getting your hopes up.
Yeah.
um, yeah, very people really want the Dafran debate hard. Um, are these Joe? Are these five hardest stage one schedules? Is that stage one or stage two?
Oh, that's from stage one. Yeah, no, I didn't do
Okay,
the calculations for stage two.
okay, cool.
But
Just wanted to check. Let's move on to power rankings then. You down? You
yeah,
down to go to power rankings, Joe?
yeah, let's do it. We have some.
Yeah, we do. We made them. I made the power rankings, and you made your own power rankings as well. Um, so do we want to just go down, list them off, Joe? Do you want to start off?
Sure. I mean, ours are,
Let's
first of
start
all,
off with, let's do top eight first, and then we can move on. We can
cool.
go step by step.
I was just gonna say that, first of all, they're much more similar here now. We're calling these post stage one.
Hmm.
It's sort of a recap of how stage one went down, and maybe a little bit, looking ahead into stage two, but mostly recaps here. But yeah, so post stage one power rankings, our top six are actually identical, all in places. And so we're gonna post a graphic of this, so you can look on our Twitter, even as you're listening to the show, and follow along here. Again, we've got like the placings and how they've changed and stuff too. But so for both of us, top six starts with Vancouver at number one, the New York Excelsior at two, San Francisco Shock at three, Philadelphia Fusion number four, Los Angeles Gladiators number five, and Seoul Dynasty at number six. And then for you, seven and eight, we have Guangzhou Charge at seven and London at eight. Um, and for me, my number seven is the Atlanta Rain, followed by the Dallas Fuel. Um,
Very different. Very different.
it's true.
Um, if we want to, I mean, I feel like the top six is obvious. Maybe an outlier is the Gladiators, who didn't even make stage playoffs. But if you're in the same thinking as me, Joe, they looked pretty good there at the end of the stage. Looked like they finally came into form. And the talent on this roster is undeniable. You can't deny this team has one of the most talented rosters. Is that correct in saying that, Joe?
Absolutely, yeah, and it's like a lot of teams this season. They're a team that's practically new, or a big chunk of their core roster was replaced and shuffled around, and so yeah, to be coming into their own is it makes sense for them, and I think they're delivering.
Yeah. I guess the other question listeners might have is John and Joe, it was Vancouver versus San Francisco in the stage one finals. Why is New York at number two? Um, And my answer to that is, despite New York, all New York has to do, honestly, they maybe should be number one because I do think their roster is better than Vancouver's. But all New York has to do is not choke, and they will easily win the entire league. They are the best team by far, in my opinion. Um, but they just choke every time. So that's that's why I have them at number two. Why do you, Joe?
Yeah, it was really like unfortunate and a shame that watching these stage one playoffs, that yeah, there was no way basically at all that the New York should have performed it the way they did. Uh, and like you said, we still have yet to see New York versus Vancouver. People were saying, "Oh, that's going to be stage one playoffs or stage one finals," but of course,
Yeah,
that's
it's
still
not
we
how it
still
works.
we're waiting for stage four at the latest. Uh, but yeah, no, in the rest in the entire rest of the season, New York has just been really super dominant, um, and you can't really throw that away off of three maps against Seoul or four, I guess, but
Um,
or was it three? I
yeah,
don't even remember.
it was it was four. Yeah, 3-1.
Okay,
Three to
there you
one
go.
was the final score. Yeah, I agree with you there. New York's still a fantastic team. If you're falling for the trap of New York lost to Seoul, they're bad now. Don't. They're gonna absolutely come out dominant again, and I wouldn't be surprised if they just like go undefeated every stage because this team is very good. Clearly. Then we move on to our seven and eights, which are completely different for the first time in our power rankings. My seven is Guangzhou. Yours is Atlanta. Um, I guess I can go over Guangzhou first. They moved up seven in my power rankings, which is a lot. That's the most by far, alongside another team, which I'll mention later. But Guangzhou, number seven, they didn't even make the stage playoffs. They finished at 3-4, but they did. This was the stage where they had to play the Vancouver Titans twice. The first time they played them close, second time not as close. But I really am impressed by the talent on this roster. I'm impressed with their play style, with how they adapt, and how close they are playing everybody in the league, despite sort of being a roster that was just thrown together and has Kib in there as well, alongside Chinese speakers, Korean speakers. He's the only English speaker, at least, who has played in the starting lineup. So I've been pretty impressed by the Guangzhou Chargers' play so far. I think if they had an easier schedule, they easily would have made stage playoffs last stage. They unfortunately had to play the Titans twice, which stinks. Um, but yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing what they could do going forward. Joe, Atlanta, number seven.
Yeah. But yeah, and so talking about just in general trying to do these power rankings, I think just like the stage one standings ended up, once you get below about number six, this gets really hard. You
Yeah.
commented on this.
Uh,
I'll definitely agree with that. Um, that just the density of teams that we have and the limited information that we have about these teams is really what's we've only seen seven matches, obviously for each one, but that's sort of a limitation doing this, but yeah, it's really hard. But so Atlanta, another team that did make the stage one playoffs, another team that very easily could have, like I said, won their first round even against the Fusion, um, but didn't quite make it at that specific time. But they had a really good stage one. It's not I don't think um, too much of a stretch to say that. Pulling out some really solid wins and some really close losses. Just thinking about against Philly again in week one, I think it was. Um, but yeah, so the loss of Dafran, obviously that's going to be that is going to hurt him a little bit going into stage two. Um, Like it says, it's just a matter of where they can make that up and how they can make that up. But that they definitely deserve uh, out of this mass of mid-tier teams, a notable spot. I think for the way they showed up. Again, expansion team. Nobody really knew much of what to expect, but showed up and were able to put something out there. As a team.
Yeah, I agree. Atlanta, they looked really good. I don't agree on the spot, obviously, because I don't have them in the same spot. But yeah, Atlanta, a good team. And what you're saying about seven, yeah, I messaged you saying it got like in my power rankings. After six, I was like, it got really hard now. Um, yeah, it's super. It was mainly hard because looking at the standings at like seven-ish, you have like Seoul and Boston, and I didn't want to put Boston at seven. I was like, no, they're not this good. I didn't want to put Dallas at seven. Um, and I was just, I don't know. I was thinking about London, and if I was just thinking to myself, obviously they didn't have a good stage one, and my ranking for London, who's at number eight, is more a little bit more looking forward than it is looking back, but I was just thinking about London, and I was like, if it was their meta, um, I would have like them beating most of these teams, honestly. And if it wasn't goats specifically, because they kind of stink at goats, and if they could play something else, I would take London over a lot of teams just because their talent's so high. So I put them at number eight, which still a pretty big drop because I had them at number one at the beginning. Um, and I mentioned it on the podcast before. I'm looking forward to seeing what London can do. And if you think London is down and out, you're completely wrong. Because so many people said that last season at so many points because they weren't performing as well as they did at the beginning. But they ended up winning the whole darn thing because this team is super talented, and when they turn on the Jets, when they really want to start playing, and when they're in the meta that favors them, they're really good. So you can't. I don't think you can count them out.
Yeah,
You're
no,
number eight.
I definitely agree. I feel like we can say that about a lot of teams, including the Dallas Fuel.
Yeah,
That's why I have them sitting at number eight over on my side of the power rankings. But yeah, I actually went into the season. I had them at number five, and obviously didn't quite make it there. But they were only a map or two out of map or two versus Boston out of the stage playoffs. Um, that yeah, the Dallas is a team that um, they know what they want to do, and when they execute it well, they can be really powerful. Lots of time in stage one, it was like RCK's Sombra in particular, but just in general, they can be a decisive team when they feel like it, and especially having not seen effect practically all stage. Um, there's lots of Zachary, lots of the RCK combination, but so being able to have, I think I mentioned this last week with a couple other teams, being able to have a little bit more flexibility to do what they know they're good at, and what they know they're going to be able to execute well, I think is Dallas is another team that's going to be really important for. Um, but so assuming that can happen, I'm not prepared to pull them too far down, just because of a ninth place stage one finish.
yeah. I agree with you, Dallas. Good team. It's just all about execution for this team. If they execute, they do well. Let's move on to number nine. Let's do number nine through 12. Um, just to round off sort of the wild card teams. These are the teams that would make the wild card playoffs in our eyes or whatever. I'll start. Mine. These aren't the same. Mine's number 9 Boston, number 10 Dallas, number 11 Atlanta, number 12 Chengdu, um, and then Joe's is number 9 Shanghai, number 10 Boston, number 11 Paris, number 12 London. So we both have Boston in a similar spot. You want to talk about Boston, real quick, Joe?
Yeah, I mean, what to say about Boston, really? But they had sort of a rocky start to stage one. Had to actually give Fusions a proper contract and all that. But he's definitely their biggest asset so far on this roster, which is saying something. Considering everybody else who is also playing for Boston, but um, really solid team. Just edged into the Stage One playoffs, and then didn't perform particularly well against what must have been Vancouver that they played. But still really solid team. Uh, this sort of tier is yeah, a lot of teams where your positioning, like in terms of the power rankings, it just depends whether you're looking forward or backward, or whether whether they're on or they're off, or whether they happen to be playing goats well that day or not. The temperature of yeah, Axiom's seat as he's whatever. But but yeah, it's definitely a contender. Boston are. And so, if we get into a position where we can see more, DPS plays from Color Hex, for example, or stuff like that, it's going to be really, really helpful for Boston for sure.
Yeah, Boston. Mine's at 9. Of course, yours is at 10. But yeah, I think Boston. I'm a little scared for this team and going down and having a worse stage two. But honestly, I think Color Hex a little bit underperformed this last stage. I think he could perform a little bit better. So I think this team hasn't even reached its full potential. I think Fusions was such a huge asset in Goats meta. I don't know how important Vocal Reinhardt's going to be in future metas, but I'm guessing important because shot caller has always been important in Overwatch. So Boston more impressive, and I think almost everybody thought this team was going to be a lot worse than they were. But I had him at number 12 in my power rankings, so I was pretty close. Joe had him at 15. Um, yeah, I had a feeling that this roster was not going to be performing as bad as people thought. Um, Shanghai Dragons, Joe. You have him at number 9. That's your number 9 team. I don't have him. I don't have him in my top 12, as far as we know so far. So Shanghai, what do you think of them? They got their first win, but they also got two more.
It's true.
So
One of 17 teams this stage to finish with at least three wins. Yeah, obviously Shanghai is a completely different team, even than they were at the beginning of the season. Practically with the addition of Gamsu there in like week one, but certainly at the end of last season too. And yeah, it takes time to build in, the kind of confidence and the kind of progress that needs to happen for this team to get them to where they need to be. And if that has to start with the fourth hardest stage one schedule in the league, then that's what it's going to have to be. Or fifth hardest in terms of opponents' win percentage, but still to be able to pull off 3 and 4 out of that, and be a significant, start being talked about for reasons that aren't bad. In stage one is notable for them. So to put them again in this power ranking at ninth is this whole window of 9 through 11, 9 through 12, something like that is it's so hairpin minuscule, but yeah, Shanghai is definitely on the way up. I think that there's it's just a matter of trying to build in that experience with this roster, trying to build in, at a certain point, you just get the attitude, an attitude change that needs to happen about, we don't have to be a losing team anymore. Um, that all that is just gonna help them keep going up, I think.
Yeah. Um, I agree with you. Shanghai impressive, and I want to reiterate, it is so all these rankings from now on are like
If you were
so
talking, I can't hear
close. These rankings are just super
you. Oh,
close.
maybe. There we go.
And maybe with the exception of sort of getting towards the bottom. I think the bottom teams are a little more obvious. Um, but yeah, let's let's move on to. I guess I could talk about my Atlanta ranking because Atlanta number 11. Joe had them at number 7. Um, so eleven's a little far down, especially with their fifth place finish in stage one, and this one was more taking into account next stage and maybe Dafran not necessarily being there in general. I think Dafran's a big part, and I would call Dafran Atlanta Reigns MVP last stage for sure. So losing your best player is not something to laugh over. I think that's a big thing. But if they still had Dafran, to be honest, they would be around 8. So this isn't like they dropped him like 3-ish spots. I'm not that high on Atlanta as most people. Most people are a little higher on Atlanta than I am, I would say. I like their team. They can beat. They definitely are better than a lot of teams, but I have them. I have them at 11 here. Your number 11, Joe, is the Paris Eternal, a team you had very high up. They didn't perform as well as they should have in Goat's meta, but you're a little higher on them than I am going into stage 2. Why is that?
It's true, yeah. I took him down from eighth to 11th here in this post stage one power rankings. And again, this is I think more of a forward looking ranking than backward because we haven't I'm absolutely confident to say we haven't seen the last out of Soon, out of Shadowburn, out of Nico. Um, that are hopefully going to be able to start flexing their DPS muscles a bit for this squad. And obviously, we were pretty skeptical about this stage one start. That Paris was supposed to be really good this stage, and it didn't quite happen. So assuming that doesn't. Um, what am I saying? Assuming that doesn't, affect him too much, they don't let that, get to him. I think there is still potential in this Batiste meta we're going into, and granted the extent to which we've moved away from goats is still, debatable. We won't really be able to see until, Thursday to an extent, but I'm not. It's the same sort of thing. I'm not quite ready to dump out on Paris completely. And compared to where we had them at the beginning of the season, they dropped 3 places for me. They only dropped about one. On yours, it's we were similarly disappointed, I think, but just not enough to equalize us, I guess.
Yeah. Yes. I guess so. Um, and my 12 was Chengdu Hunters, which is a big jump because I had them at 19, and now they're in the top 12. They're in the wild card, and it's mainly for. I mean, they were looking really good towards the end of the season or stage, but I think it was in, like we've mentioned on this podcast before. It was in Goats meta when they weren't playing to the meta whatsoever. If the future meta sort of favors them a lot more, I think Chengdu can compete with some of the best teams, and they already were competing with some of the best teams. Vancouver Titans took it to 5 maps. I really like the Chengdu Hunters. I like their roster. I like their talent. That's why I have them at number 12, going into stage number 2. Obviously, we can't go over everything. We have to speed through. So let's move on. to 13. Let's do 13 through 16. Let's do another four. At mine is number 13 Shanghai, number 14 Toronto, number 15 Hangzhou, and then Paris finally showing up on my rankings at 16. For Joe, it's Guangzhou at 13, Toronto at 14, same as me. Then Chengdu at 15, and Hangzhou at 16. Um, let's see. Let's both talk about Toronto, Joe. We both have them at 14.
Yeah,
Uh,
and
we
I
t-
think we've alluded to it already earlier this show.
yeah,
It's a team's. We started at 16 and 17 in our power rankings at the beginning of the season, and they've gone up a little bit. It's coming up in what, third place, I guess, in stage one. He's notable. That's impressive. But the team itself, not quite convinced. Not quite convinced that in the at the end of stage four, they'll still be sitting in that third place spot. Um, yeah, it's just like I said, they haven't convinced me that they're not pretending.
yeah. It's wow. I mean, it's you rarely see that in power rankings. That like especially after 7 games. And both of us have done the same thing. And me and you haven't talked about Toronto too much to each other. So this is, I mean, we're both just not that convinced by it, even though they have a 5-2 start. And it's also that, for me at least, it's also that every other team is also really good. Like I can't. It's so hard. Like Toronto might be number 14, but they're kind of like one step away from being number 8 or something like that. Honestly, like all these teams are so close.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I'm not too convinced by Toronto quite yet. And when they've played good teams, they haven't looked that great. So not that convinced by Toronto yet. Let's move on to talk about Hangzhou, which I think was a disappointment in stage one for a lot of people. I have them at 15. You have them at 16, Joe. Hangzhou Spark, is there a chance of a bright outlook going forward, or is this team just that scrim team that will never cash in on their scrim bucks?
I mean, there's a chance. We keep saying over and over for lots of these teams. But yeah, definitely Hangzhou was a team that people were really really super positive about, and then just didn't ever quite come out in stage one, which is surprising. With the kind of talent that we see on this team. Um, yeah, so it's definitely there. The potential is there. They've got a depth of 4 DPS players, and a full, I think, 11 person roster. Not quite 12, but um, yeah, the potential's there. It just didn't happen for whatever reason in stage one, which can be a little concerning. As a fan for sure, but yeah, we both had to drop them pretty significantly after stage one. That they've got a hole to climb out of. That basically they created for themselves, unfortunately. But and it's again, it's a 3 and 4 hole. It's not a 0 and 7 hole, but we'll see.
Yeah. I, I I don't know. Hangzhou, talented team. I don't know what to say about them because yeah, they didn't do as well as they should have for sure. But we'll see. We'll see what they do. I still have them 15. They're still around the race to make wild card, but other teams have impressed me a little bit more so far. Let's move on to the bottom four, Joe. Which we have the same 4 teams, but there's a little bit of a difference. Valiant for me, Valiant number 17, then Houston 18, and then Washington and Florida at 19 and 20, which we have the same. But we've switched Houston and the Valiant. You have Houston at 17 and Valiant at 18, so a little bit of a difference there. I guess we should argue about this, Joe. This
Should
is
we?
our chance.
I mean, 17 and 18, really? But
You're very right, honestly. Yeah.
it is close between the teams. I mean, on the one hand, we've got the LA Valiant, the only winless team in the league so far, and the team that benched Custa for being too smart, and then on the other hand, we've got Houston, which has sort of been sort of been a question mark all the way since the end of last season even, trying to figure out exactly where they're going to be headed, and where they're going to be sitting, in with what at times feels like sort of an inflexible roster. Um, yeah, I don't know. I think the LA Valiant has more, the more of the impercept the not imperceptible, in concrete, insubstantial things, to work out with their play if they want to start getting some wins. Whereas Houston, I think, just has to be able to find something that works for them, and do it, rather than, uh, rather than try to be, try to put limits on themselves, but to just, figure out something, and maintain it. And obviously, it's going to be a different something in stage two than it would have been, a couple weeks ago. But both these teams, pretty disappointing, I think, for their fans, um, in stage one. Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I definitely think Valiant have a little more. They have a little more to sort of work out and figure out on their team. Figure out a concrete starting lineup, and they're gonna have a new coach now and all this stuff. They have a lot more to figure out. But I think once they do, I like their team a little bit more than Houston. Um, but you're I mean I disregarded the Junkrat buffs, honestly. Jake could be popping off very soon here in the Overwatch League. And they were Houston was like one of the top teams when Junkrat was meta. So it could spell some success for Houston. Who knows? But despite their 3-4 starts and in 12th place currently on the standings, I think both of us think they're a little bit meh. Um, we both have them in our bottom four, and then Washington and Florida. Um, I think these are obvious ones. Washington at one against Florida to give them that 19th spot, Joe. That was what they were playing for.
Yeah. And in Florida with the win over Philly, it's like, oh, isn't that a much more significant isn't that a much more significant win? But that was, sure, a weird week for Philly, but also just Florida's been having a weird life lately. Uh,
Florida always gets the weird wins. I feel like Florida and Shanghai were super even last season, but Florida like somehow just picked up some weird wins when other teams were underperforming or under the weather. Like they once again took advantage of like Boombox not being in the starting lineup and taking a win there. They easily could have been 0-7 if Boombox was in the lineup. So Florida always just picks up wins somehow, somewhere, some way. They'll do it. Uh, but I'm still never impressed by their roster. Yeah, those are
and
our
that's 20.
yeah, those are our power rankings. Go check our Twitter if you want to take a look at the neat little graphic. Joe, thank you for making the graphics. They are fantastic. Um, let's move on though to stage two finally. Of course, if you haven't been listening to this podcast, what have you been doing with your life? But also, we predict 4 games every week, and me and Joe keep track of those. And we're gonna pick a season winner. Once the season's over, one of us will have a better record. Joe, what is it right now? I believe I'm winning by 1 game.
Yeah, I don't have it pulled up, but yeah, it's like 13 to 12 or something out of 16.
Yes.
Let's see.
I'm a winner. Yeah, we're not count. I don't think we're ended. We're not going to count the bracket. Um, is the
Yeah,
decision?
doesn't look like it. So 12 to 11 out of 16. So
Okay.
there you go.
Yeah, I finished off the stage with a perfect week. Joe was one off a perfect week. He was so close. But my Boston over Dallas pick was too good, Too smart.
Evidently.
We start off our preview of the week by going over some storylines to watch. These are sort of the games we're not going to be predicting, that we think is worth sort of touching on. Joe, you pointed out in the rundown here, Guangzhou Charge, the LA Gladiators, the Paris Eternal, the Shanghai Dragons, and the Hangzhou Spark are all presented with some quality chances for wins here, which is some things they desperately need. And honestly, Paris, a 2-0 week away from like being number 5 or something. Like the standings are so close. Even though Paris is 16th right now, they could easily just jump up to like number 6 in the standings if they just get a couple wins. Um, and Hangzhou Spark, they have a tough one against Vancouver towards the end of the week. Well, overall, I think a storyline to watch as well, Joe, is the new meta, and if anything changes. And Joe, I have
It's
a
a big
feeling
if.
I have a feeling maybe people are going to be a bit disappointed this week because they've barely had any time to practice the new meta. So, do
It's,
you think
I mean, especially
how
if
much
you're San Francisco Shock and Vancouver Titans.
exactly? How much do you think we still see a majority goats, Joe? That's my question.
I mean, it's gonna be because of time, like you said, and also because there's sort of an art to pro team composition. That there's you have to consider not only what's good but also what you know and what you're going to be able to execute at a high level. And it's definitely true that here at the beginning of stage 2 in particular, we are going to see lots of goats still. Whether that's modified in some way, add a DPS player, a DPS hero like Sombra, or like something else. Maybe they add Soldier to the speedy running mix. Who knows? But um, whether you add some DPS or whether you add Batiste or something like that, but it's definitely going to start with what these teams know and what these teams are really good at. Yeah, so I am definitely going to expect to see lots of goes this first week, for sure, and maybe beyond. But yeah, it's I think teams are going to be able to fairly easily win themselves some fans. I think by being the first one to pull out, some weird crazy pick here in stage 2. And we'd see Paris map too. That's gonna be cool.
Oh
But
yeah, Paris.
but
Um,
yeah,
yeah, I agree with you. I think we see a majority goats, but I think maybe we see teams like London Spitfire who clearly hate goats just be, especially since they're playing Florida. I think we see London Spitfire just be like, just put these people on DPS. Like, just do. I don't know what the strategy is. I don't know what the composition is. Just do it. Just throw people on Soldier McCree. I do not care. I
we're
think
just
that's
gonna
what
see
London
what
Spitfire.
happens.
Yeah, exactly. They haven't had time to come up with like this composition is going to be the best because I think most of these teams took time to take like a break almost during this little 2 week break
Yeah,
for the teams that did make stage playoffs, um, and didn't have to play in week 5, which was a lot of the league. So I think London, if they're going to pull out a triple DPS or something like that, or any DPS, it's not going to be like a set in stone strategy. It's going to be like, let's just play DPS because we're really good at it and we're talented, and they're the characters are stronger now. The heroes are stronger now. So there's a good chance that they can beat goats maybe.
absolutely.
So yeah, but I think we see teams that are good at goats just stick to it, and try their hardest to say, hey, goats is still a thing. Maybe even Paris is supposed to be good at goats. I don't know if they continue to play it, but um, they underperformed. That Paris Guangzhou game should be good. In
Yeah,
fact, we're predicting it.
it's true.
Um, Spoiler, but let's get into our first prediction, which I think is a fantastic game: Philadelphia Fusion versus New York Excelsior. Especially since New York is coming off of that terrible loss to the Seoul Dynasty. Um, this is going to be an interesting one. Philadelphia Fusion is they were the team to pull off that big upset in the playoffs last season to get them to the championship. They beat the New York Excelsior to face off against London Spitfire. So New York has choked to this team before. They just choked the last time we saw them. Do they choke this time, Joe?
I mean, as easy as it would be to say yes, um, well, actually, no, hold on, because the thing I was thinking in my head is not what I have written on the piece of paper. So, uh, yeah, so let me start that sentence differently. That I think it's very easy to say yes. That that's relatively likely here for this New York squad, which is unfortunate. But I think the other thing worth considering, and this is what I had in my head that I realized didn't match what I was going to say, was I think Philly is another team that's relatively likely to come out on something weird that people are not expecting.
Agreed.
And we've seen almost two different Philly teams that there's the Philly that does get creative and is able to do the things that they do well, no matter what they are. And then we've also seen the Philly that struggles to sort of click into to what they might be expected to do, and struggles a lot for that. And so I think obviously, hopefully, we see the good Philly in this match, and I think if we do, that it actually is going to be it's going to work out pretty successfully for them. I'm going to give this one to Philly.
Ooh, I think that while Philly is definitely, I think this is going to be a really good first match because I think both teams are going to be likely to come out on something not goats. I think both teams dislike goats. I think both teams would be a lot better, which is crazy to say about both teams because Philadelphia went 5-2 and New York went 7-0 last stage in goats meta. But I think both teams are a lot better in a not goats meta, in a meta where their DPS are there, they're highlighted. New York has 5 DPS. We have not seen Sableby. We have not seen Pine. We haven't seen these insane players we saw last season. And I think they really want to use them. There's a reason they're on their roster. So I think New York comes out with some crazy strats too. I think both of them do. I think both of them play lots of DPS. And it's going to be so sad listening back to this when they both just play goats the whole time. But I'm going New York. So we are already on opposite sides of the spectrum here, Joe.
It's true.
Let's move in. So that's the first game of the week on Thursday. The last game on Thursday is Guangzhou versus Paris Eternal. This is the only time we will see them face each other in the season because Guangzhou's in Pacific, Paris is in Atlantic. This is going to be a very, very interesting matchup. Paris struggled, of course, a little bit. Both teams finished at 3-4. Guangzhou, a little bit of a tougher schedule. Paris's wins ended up being not as impressive once it came down to the wire, because we looked back and we said, oh, those teams actually aren't good that they beat, and we were impressed with, like London and all that. Does I mean Paris? They said they talked. They said we're the best goats. We're so good. That means they got to stick on goats, right, Joe? Even though they struggled.
For Paris, yeah, I mean, if the alternative is doing something, that they're not prepared on and they're not comfortable with, I think that's even going to be worse for this team.
Yeah. But you did mention they have. I mean, I think it's Soon was somebody who just didn't shine that much in goats at all. Um, you have these players, and Nico. I've always been impressed by Nico's DPS play as well. I think you definitely have players on here that would love to be playing DPS. Um, but Paris, they're the goats team. EU's where goats originated. They've got to represent, right? But on the other side, you have the Guangzhou Charge, who I think have been super impressive, and I think I just have to give this to them, even though Paris gets to play on their home map, Paris, on map two. I don't think it
Yeah.
matters. I'm going Guangzhou.
Yeah, that's actually also my pick as well. Paris, like, if I didn't say it, I certainly meant to say it when we were talking about them earlier. That they've got a really big, climb ahead of them to sort of get out of, the spot that they landed themselves in at the end of stage one. And I think, unfortunately, it may have to start with them, with sort of, a week or a couple matches of experimentation, and seeing what works and what doesn't. And unfortunately, I think that's going to be to their detriment against this Guangzhou team that, is, a lot stronger than some, um, than we might have thought at the beginning of the season for sure.
Yeah, and then not to mention they then have to face Chengdu on Saturday, whose team composition they might actually be the meta team composition now. So
It's true.
uh, they have two pretty, I think, pretty tough matchups, and I do think this one's going to be a close one. But I do think Guangzhou takes it in the end. Guangzhou likes to play it close, no matter who they're playing. Gladiators. They're already back to facing the Seoul Dynasty. This was a matchup we saw in the first week. This is their second matchup. It's of course big because Fissure. This is Fissure's old team, and Fissure, he really likes to beat his old teams. He beat London to make the stage playoffs last stage, and then he beat the Los Angeles Gladiators way back in week one, and looked pretty convincing while doing it. Seoul's coming off a hot stage. LA Gladiators, though, looks like a completely different team since that week one matchup against Seoul Dynasty. They're finally cohesive. They have Decay now. They didn't have Decay when they faced Seoul the first time. Joe, is this different day, same result, or is this a whole new game here, a whole new ball game?
Yeah, I think for all of those reasons, it's definitely looking really good for the Gladiators. I think that's at least how I'm going to call it here and now. But yeah, you're right. This is a team that looks really, really different, even from this time in stage one. Um, there's a lot we can say about the way this team has changed, and hopefully, the successes they're going to continue to have. That yeah, I'm pretty comfortable. Well, to the extent you can be pretty comfortable about anything. Uh, yeah, I want to see the Gladiators take this. They definitely have the potential to, and show us, exactly the kind of prep they've been doing here, in this not the off season, but the off weeks, here before stage two.
Yeah. God, this one's so tough for me because I don't know. The Seoul, both these teams are pretty hot. Honestly, Seoul Dynasty is streaking. Gladiators. I mean, Seoul's coming off a New York XL win. They're coming off London Spitfire win. They're coming off of looking just really good, and this is gonna be a great game. It's so hard. Mm. It's hard. It's the hardest thing for me right now is picking Fissure against one of his old teams. As I mean, everyone knows I'm a Gladiators fan. I love the Gladiators, but it's Fissure just shows up when he's playing against his old teams. So I'm going Soul here. It's going to be a five mapper, but I'm going Soul. Last game, Toronto Boston. This is another rematch. Probably, like I mentioned earlier, one of Toronto's defining wins was the Boston Uprising last stage, which isn't the best sentence to say about a team, which is why we both have them pretty low. But they're here to face Boston once again. Um, does Boston even up the series, tie it up at 1-1 overall, or does Toronto win again? They won 3-1 last time.
Yeah, so I'm calling this one for Boston. Um, that yeah, I think it's definitely likely enough that we're gonna see success out of them on this go round is not not a stretch to say. I don't think at all. And again, for Toronto, if they can get this win, it's another really good step for them. At least in my head, if nothing else, because obviously they want to prove themselves to the on the flank analysts. But but yeah, no, I'm not. I think Boston is going to be able to, um, really show how much they've grown, even since these playoffs. Which again, the first round might not have gone so well for them, but to make it that I think they're going to be prepared to show us that they are in that spot.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I'm going Boston. I think we both have to go Boston after putting Toronto at 14th, right, Joe? I mean, we can't.
There is
We
that,
need them
yeah.
to win for our reputation. We need them to win. But yeah, I'm also going Boston. Um, I like their roster. There wasn't. I mean, it'd be a different story if that big rumor trade happened with the Valiant, which was
Yeah.
shaping up to be kind of crazy. Um, but yeah, they still got the same roster. I like their roster. I like fusions. I like what's going on here. Um, so yeah, it's going to be an interesting match, and I'm going Boston as well. Anything else to say before we sign off, Joe?
I don't think so. Overwatch is
Yeah,
back. It's time. Here we go.
it's time to watch goats again. Unfortunately, and the crowd boos. They hate me.
Yeah.
Boo. But yeah, if you guys want to follow us on social media, our personal Twitter accounts, mine is at JWGeorgeIV, Joe's is at Kirkpatrick_Inc. That's INC. Our show has a Twitter at On the Flank Show. We've mentioned it throughout the episode. Joe tweets out graphics there. We tweet out episodes, all of that good stuff. Our email is ontheflankshow@gmail.com. If you ever want us to talk about something that you would like us to talk about, you can email us topics. You can email us questions. You can also tweet at us if you don't want to email us. You are listening to this in one way. If you want to listen to it in another way, you can go to ontheflank.podbean.com on your internet browser. You can also go to my YouTube channel, which is John George. The best way to find that's on my Twitter. You can go on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Google Play. We are on all those services. Thank you guys for listening, and enjoy the very first week of stage number 2.